There's a file with your name on it that you've never seen. It doesn't show up in your employee portal. It isn't mentioned in your onboarding paperwork. Nobody's told you it exists, but it's been building since your first week. Every time you interact with HR, every time you file a complaint, every time a complaint is filed about you, every time you call in sick in a pattern that triggers a flag, every time you push back on a policy or escalate an issue or have a tense exchange with your manager that gets mentioned in a check-in, something gets added to that file, and that file will be opened and read the next time someone makes a decision about your career at this company. Let me be clear about what I'm describing. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This is standard HR operations. Every HR department in every company of meaningful size maintains employee files that go beyond the basics you already know about: your offer letter, your W-2, your benefits enrollment forms. These expanded files include documented incidents, complaint records, investigation summaries, informal manager feedback, accommodation requests, disciplinary notes, performance intervention discussions, and a category that most employees don't even know exists: informal observations. Informal observations are the notes that get added when something happens that doesn't rise to the level of a formal disciplinary action. But someone in HR or management wants to create a record anyway. Maybe you raised your voice in a meeting and a colleague mentioned it to HR. No formal complaint was filed. No investigation was launched. But a note went into your file. Employee exhibited elevated tone during project meeting on March 12th. No formal complaint filed. Noted for pattern tracking. Maybe you pushed back firmly on a deadline and your manager mentioned it in their weekly check-in with their HR business partner. No write-up happened. No conversation with you occurred, but a note was added. Manager reported pushback on Q2 deliverable timeline. Employee requested extension. Discussion ongoing. Maybe you asked a pointed question about overtime classification, which is completely within your legal rights to ask. But someone in HR typed a line into your record because asking about legal rights is, from the company's risk management perspective, a leading indicator that you might become a legal problem later. The note doesn't say this employee is a threat. It says something clinical like, employee inquired about FLSA overtime classification status on April 3rd. Neutral language. But neutral language in an HR file isn't neutral. It's a breadcrumb. And when enough breadcrumbs accumulate, they create a trail that tells a story you never authored, never reviewed, and can't edit. Here's what's typically in that file, and why each category matters more than you think. The first category is every complaint you've ever filed. Every time you went to HR with a concern about a coworker, a manager, a policy, or a working condition, that complaint was documented in full. Not just the substance of what you reported, the tone of the conversation, the frequency of your complaints, the outcome of any investigation. If you filed a complaint and the investigation found no policy violation, that's in the file. And the way it reads to someone reviewing it later isn't employee had a valid concern that was addressed. It reads as complaint investigated. No violation found, no action taken. To someone who doesn't know the context, that sentence makes it look like the complaint was unfounded, whether it was or wasn't. And if you filed multiple complaints over the course of your employment, the pattern becomes the story, because now the file describes a serial complainant, someone who repeatedly raises issues that don't result in formal action. That pattern, to someone reviewing it for a layoff list or a promotion decision, reads as difficult or high maintenance or litigation prone. Even if every single one of your complaints was completely legitimate and professionally delivered, the second category is complaints filed about you. If a coworker or manager ever reported a concern about your behavior, your communication style, your attendance, your attitude, or anything else, that report is in your file, even if nobody ever told you about it. Even if HR determined it was too minor for a formal conversation, they documented it. It sits there waiting to be referenced the next time someone needs a reason to justify a decision about you. Think about how that feels. Someone complained about you at some point. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was entirely fabricated, and you have no idea it happened. But there's a note in your file that says it did, and you can't respond to it because you don't know it exists. The third category is your medical and accommodation history. If you've ever requested a workplace accommodation under ADA, if you've taken extended medical leave, FMLA, or disability leave, if you've disclosed a health condition to HR, there's a record of it. Legally, this medical information is supposed to be stored separately from your general personnel file and accessed only for compliance purposes. In practice, the separation is imperfect. The people who process your accommodation request know who you are. The HR business partner who approved your leave remembers you took it. And in a company where headcount reduction decisions are being made, that awareness creates an invisible weight that nobody will ever admit to, but that influences outcomes. The fourth category is your full performance paper trail. This goes far beyond your annual review scores. It includes every documented conversation your manager has had with HR about your performance. If your manager ever said, "I'm starting to have concerns about this employee's engagement," in a monthly sync with their HR partner, that's been noted. If they discussed putting you on a performance improvement plan and then decided against it, the discussion itself is documented. If they asked HR, "What would the process look like if I needed to let this person go?" Even hypothetically, that question generated a note. This is the part that shocks people. You might think that if no formal action was taken, nothing was recorded. That's not how HR works. HR's primary function is to create a paper trail that protects the company, and a thorough paper trail includes near misses, preliminary conversations, and hypothetical scenarios, not just final outcomes. The fifth category is what I'd call behavioral trajectory notes. These are the observations that predict what the company thinks you might do in the future. Did you mention in a skip-level meeting that you were exploring opportunities outside the company? Noted, did you decline a transfer opportunity that leadership thought you should have accepted? Noted, did you negotiate aggressively or emotionally during your last compensation review? Noted, did you express frustration in a team meeting that was later described to HR as a concerning reaction? Noted, none of these things are fireable offenses. Most of them aren't even policy violations, but together, they create a behavioral profile, and that profile gets consulted every time a decision about your career path, your eligibility for a project, your inclusion in a restructuring, or your candidacy for promotion is being discussed. Now, here's the question everyone asks at this point. Can you actually see this file? The answer depends entirely on where you work and what laws apply to you. Several states have statutes that give employees the right to request and inspect their personnel file. California, Illinois, Massachusetts, and a handful of others have relatively clear access laws. But even in those states, the definition of personnel file is debated. Some companies argue that informal HR notes, manager conversation summaries, and investigation records don't constitute part of the official personnel file and therefore aren't subject to employee disclosure. And in states without access laws, the company has no obligation to show you anything beyond basic employment verification data. This means there is potentially a comprehensive record of your professional history at this company that you can't see, can't correct, can't contextualize, and can't control. Other people can read it, you can't. So what do you do about this? First, operate with the assumption that everything is being documented. Every email you send to HR, every conversation you have with your manager about a sensitive topic, every complaint you file, every time someone files one about you, every question you ask about policy, legal rights, or compensation. Assume it goes into a file, because it probably does. Second, create your own parallel record. When something important happens at work, document it yourself. When you have a conversation with HR, follow up with an email. Thanks for meeting with me today. Just to confirm, we discussed the following topics and agreed on these next steps. That email goes into your sent folder. You control it. And it creates a parallel record that exists alongside whatever HR wrote in their system. If there's ever a discrepancy, you have your version documented in real time. Third, Be strategic about what you bring to HR. Not every frustration needs to become a formal conversation. Not every annoyance needs to be reported. Before going to HR with a concern, ask yourself honestly, will this conversation lead to a resolution I actually want, or will it just add another note to my file that I can never see or respond to? If the answer is the second one, consider whether there's a more effective way to handle the situation. Fourth, if you're in a state that allows it, request your file. Exercise your legal right to see what's in there. Even if you don't expect to find anything alarming, it's worth knowing, because in a layoff, a restructuring, or a termination dispute, that file is the very first thing the company's attorneys will review. It's better to know what's in it now than to be surprised by it later. Fifth, understand what HR's job actually is. It's not to advocate for you. It's not to mediate fairly. It's to manage organizational risk. Every interaction you have with HR is being evaluated through that lens. Is this person a risk? If so, what kind of risk? Legal risk? Operational risk? Cultural risk? And what should we document to protect the company? That framing isn't cynical. It's structural. HR exists inside a system that has priorities, and you are not the top priority. The company's legal exposure is the top priority. Your complaint is evaluated against that priority. Your behavior is documented according to that priority, and the file that results is a product of that priority. The file exists whether you acknowledge it or not. The only question is whether you're aware enough to influence what goes into it. Whether you think about how your interactions with HR will be recorded. Whether you follow up important conversations in writing. Whether you understand that every moment of friction, every complaint, every accommodation request, and every emotional conversation is being stored in a system you don't control and can't access. Because by the time someone opens that file to make a decision about your employment, it's too late to change the story it tells.